This episode is brought to you by Rad Dudes Who Love Nature.
Good night, guys. Have a good night. Good luck with your photos. We're like, thanks. Good luck not getting arrested.
Aw.
It was sweet. It was good. They were good kids.
Some very sweet graffiti puns.
Totally. Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Urban Wildlife Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Billy Brown. On this episode, we've got a conversation with Toronto-based urban wildlife photographer Andrew Budziak about his video series looking at Canadian urban wildlife coast to coast, from Vancouver to St. John's. You can catch them all on Narcity's YouTube channel, and Narcity is spelled Narcity. We found out about this because Andrew dropped us a note, which is something you can do if you've got an urban wildlife project, media, research, whatever, that you'd like to share. You can reach us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com, which is where you'll get the fastest reply. We pay a little attention to the cesspool that is Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast, so if you tweet at us, we'll see it eventually. Heads up that the City Nature Challenge is coming up April 28th to May 1st around the world. If you're not already a iNaturalist user, this is a great time to get the hang of the app and start logging observation. They'll help conservation agencies and scientists learn more about what lives where you live and where you go, and you'll be able to take part in the CNC. Think about supporting the podcast on Patreon via our Wildlife Observer Network account. Tony and I don't expect to ever get rich off of this, but a few bucks from our supporters really does help cover the hosting costs, equipment, etc. And now for some quick self-promotion. You can still buy my book, Exploring Philly Nature, A Guide for All Four Seasons. And these days, I'm blogging at Substack, Where the Brown Snakes Roam. So if you're looking for that nature writing fix about urban nature, you know where to go. And without too much further ado, here's my chat with Andrew. Tony was a little under the weather and had to hit the sack too early for our conversation, and he missed out. Andrew is a ton of fun to talk with and even more fun to watch on video. Listen to our conversation and then go look up the series. Do yourself a favor.
Andrew, who are you? What do you do?
I am an urban wildlife photographer. There aren't too many of us. I'm based here in Toronto, and as far as I know, I'm like the only one in Toronto doing it pretty much full time, possibly in Canada. I know there are a few people in the States that shoot a lot of urban wildlife, but this is my thing. This is my gig. This is what I do.
So you don't, this is what I find fascinating about it. You mentioned this in the introduction to your videos, that you're specifically, say, an urban wildlife photographer. And I have to admit, I've met lots of wildlife photographers who take pictures of urban wildlife in addition to lots of other wildlife that they take pictures of. Have you, I guess, always specialized in this way?
No, it's a thing I came to relatively recently, in the last couple of years. I've been taking photos since I was 15. In high school, I had a wonderful photo program with a dark room, and I think I'm 37. I think I was the last generation to have the experience of a dark room in high school. I developed film. I did that, and I moved from there sort of into the early stages of digital, which was awful. And then, into the better stages of digital, and, doing wildlife photography along the way. And yeah, it wasn't until probably, just a few years ago that I just became obsessed, and it took over, all of my time. And that's what I wanted to do. And very quickly, I lost interest kind of in shooting anything else, and my goal was wildlife in cities.
So, birders often talk about a spark bird, some particular critter that got them hooked. Is there a particular animal that you encountered in Toronto or other cities that pulled you into the urban wildlife photography?
Coyotes. I love coyotes. They're incredible. Everything about them is awesome, and you could find them all over the place, not just in cities, but the ones in cities are different. They behave differently. They learn differently. They coyotes that have been in cities for generations. Those places like Arizona and cities where they have a long history of coyotes. Those coyotes have a lower fatality rate when it comes to traffic. They've learned how to cross roads. If that's not reason enough to fall in love with these animals, I don't know what is. And they're so photogenic. Like they are just, they're dramatic. They're charismatic. They look at you. I certainly have bad photos of coyotes, but it's like, my ratio.
I have one photo of a coyote, and the coyote's dead. So you're doing better than I am.
Well, even they're you don't always come across dead ones either. Especially in urban centers, the cities pick those up pretty quickly, and the vultures, birds, the scavengers make quick work of those carcasses. So good for you for finding one.
I'll say they're also not easy to. Well, you might tell me I'm wrong, but I guess rural or countryside coyotes are more diurnal than our urban coyotes, and so I imagine they're harder to photograph.
Well, what's tricky, and this is true not just of coyotes but of all urban wildlife. If you come across a coyote, like that moment, that's it. Because when coyotes or any animals disappear in the city, they could go under a fence, right? They could go in an underpass. They can get to places where I can't easily get to. It's not like, oh, there's that coyote, I'm going to spend 3 or 4 days with it or whatever. It's gone, man. And that coyote's range could be separated by like houses, and I'm not jumping through people's backyards or climbing fences. I haven't got arrested yet, and I'm really trying to avoid that. So yeah, I mean, and like that's the challenge when you see a coyote, like that's your time with it, whatever that moment is, and it goes, like it disappears. You're not tracking that thing for too far.
No, it's fleeting. Yeah. I was Googling this really quick to remember the title of it. Have you read Coyote America by Dan Flores? Dan Flores,
that's one of my go-tos. I'm referencing that book all the time. It's so good. Have you had him on?
I have not, although now you just saying that, I'm like, my God, maybe he'd come on the pod. And this is something that's happened to me a lot in other, my background is being into reptiles and amphibians. And so there have been times that like, I wanted to reach out to a particularly famous herpetologist, and I'm always like, man, are they going to write me back? And then I'm like, they're not swamped with fans exactly. It's not like I'm trying to get Taylor Swift to write me back.
You know what? She might. You never know. She might have a passion for urban wildlife. Billy, you don't know unless you ask, right? The worst she can say is no.
And so the reason I was mentioning it's a great book, Coyote America. But B, he's got this, and I don't know if it's his hypothesis, but he discusses this hypothesis that coyotes were synanthropic is a term we use in the podcast sometimes. An animal that has evolved to live with the habitats we create. And he sort of posits in the book that coyotes were kind of synanthropic with pre-colonization indigenous peoples, so that if you were in Mesoamerican villages, cities, that you would have had coyotes hanging around there too. And so the way that they have adapted so quickly to I guess European American style urban areas, it maybe reflects like thousands of years of that kind of living that we don't appreciate today.
Synanthropic organism.
Absolutely, and another point in that book, and he's not the first to raise this. There's been a lot of research into this. Is for the first time, coyotes have that history with spending a lot of time with humans, but it's really only been in the last in North America, really the last 200, 250 to 100 years where they're suddenly like literally top dog because we've killed all the wolves. So yes. not only are they like, hey, great, we can like live with humans and we'll get a lot closer than the wolves will. The wolves will. Now there are like no wolves in so many areas, especially around humans, where humans live. So you no longer have that that threat, that competition, that pressure from wolves, and you have, what is kind of seen as this helping hand of urbanization and all the wonderful things that we leave out, and the roads that we make that coyotes have become so adapted to, and you see that if you're lucky enough to spend some time watching a coyote move around in a city, they know what they're doing. They know roads. They know how to jump over barriers. They find the spots. They've learned. So
you got me. I was wondering something. We just watched the Montreal video at the a couple nights ago, and you were talking about I forget the name of the park, but the Island Park in Montreal,
Jean Drapeau.
There you go. Which is like overrun with woodchucks, and you mentioned that they introduced foxes to try to control the woodchucks, and my first thought is, no, you don't use foxes to control woodchucks. You use coyotes to control woodchucks.
Exactly.
And so, but I guess there's not. Are there coyotes in that park?
Well, there's just such there's such a bias, right, against coyotes. Okay. Nobody's introducing coyotes or wolves, outside of Yellowstone, that reintroduction. Those are Canadian wolves, by the way. You don't have that. It just doesn't happen. And sure, foxes are cute. They don't bother people, maybe farmers and chicken coops and stuff like that. But so if anyone's ever been to Montreal, along the south shore of the city, there are a couple of islands that are connected by roads, and they're awesome. And some are kind of like, some are like super wooded. Others, other parts, they have like music festivals. So they've made really good use of these islands. But yeah, if you go to this Jean Drapeau, there are like these holes, these groundhog holes everywhere, like everywhere. We have footage. I don't think it made it into that episode of my series Edge of Frame, where I think there's like a family of like 8 of them just hanging out in the sun, these groundhogs. So yeah, apparently foxes were introduced at one point on the island to like control the population because people were breaking their legs in these holes. We didn't no spoilers, but that's not where we landed our fox photo.
No, and that was I won't. It's funny though. I'll say I once went to Detroit to on an urban wildlife search. And I'll put it this way, without spoiling it, I ran into the exact same kind of problem accessing a park that I really wanted to go to. So when it shows you driving up and encountering an obstacle,
yes.
I was like, oh man, I've done that.
That's one of the things with urban wildlife is that you can't always get to where you want to go. Like if you're in the middle of if you're in the Arctic, if you're in the Sahara, if you're in the rainforest, generally like the road, like construction's not going to be a problem. Like you're out there, but in the city, that happens all the time. These green spaces, these parks, or kind of the in between spaces, they get blocked. Like we're humans, we're doing stuff, we're on the move, we're adapting, we're changing, we're building, and that can make life hard for the wildlife and the photographers trying to find them. Yeah,
and so. I guess we'll get to the video series now, which is what the impetus for reaching out, and it's been a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, thank you.
I'll say my 4-year-old has made us rewatch the Harbor Seal episode of Vancouver, mainly because she wants to watch the scene where you are. It's sort of the end of the video. You're trying to get a picture of this harbor seal with the skyline in the background, which means you have to get the camera essentially water level. And you're dangling off of a seawall, essentially. And she's like, even though she's seen it like now 3 times, she's like, someone's gonna run over his leg, and like he's gonna drop the camera. Is he gonna fall off? And I'm like, it's been. We've all enjoyed watching it.
Oh, great.
And so, what got you started in this kind of like quest to go across the country? And put it together as a video series.
Yeah, sure. So this series that I have called Edge of Frame, there are six episodes that are out. You could find it by searching my name, Andrew Budziak, and Edge of Frame. It's on YouTube. I had started during the pandemic this little project with a friend of mine. I was kind of in the midst of photographing, as many mammals as I could in Toronto. And it was the pandemic. You couldn't go anywhere. So I do a lot of directing work. I do a lot of film work. I do a lot of just video stuff in general. My background is journalism, so there's a lot of documentary work there. So one of my very good friends and the camera operator now on the show, Mark Utley, I called him one day and I was like, hey, I've been taking photos of like deer in this part in Toronto, and it's awesome. Do you want to come? You can borrow one of my long lenses, get your awesome cinema camera, and get footage of these deers. And he's like, dude, that sounds so boring. I he's not a wildlife guy. He's like, dude, I'm like, no. He's like, I don't want to do that. He's like, but what would be way more fun for me is like getting footage of you doing that, and you talk to camera. You like, let me just follow you. And I was like, yeah, sure. It was like the dead of winter. It was like well below freezing. It was this beautiful crisp morning. It was so much fun. And we ended up like having this coyote encounter and seeing all this great stuff. So I took that footage home and just like edited this short little video that was like, I don't know, 5 minutes. And it did really well. We called it Edge of Frame. It was so fun. So we did like just 6 or 7 episodes in Toronto, just documenting finding urban wildlife, and me just out having these like adventures and as you know,
I just got excited because I realized there's more than just the six videos.
There are, yeah. They're a little rough. Those were just like those were kind of what do you call it, like little
but this
passion
is my
project.
jam. I'll enjoy watching it. Yeah.
Oh, good. And Billy, from watching the series, like I'm not. I like to say like my work is serious, so I don't have to be serious. Like it's fun, like it's a lot of screwing around and messing around and all that stuff. So it was super fun to do. And then another camera operator, Ryan, came along, and he's the guy in the Vancouver episode that you'll see. The other camera operator, he and I were scuba diving, and I have a little misadventure, and he's there with me documenting the whole thing. So what happened was I did these episodes. It was great. It was fun. It was all DIY. We were just all doing it for the heck of it. And then I applied for some funding, and we got it. Right. And we stretched that budget. Like this is...
I don't know, man. You seem to eat at these fancy restaurants everywhere you go.
Well, come on. You gotta give the people what they want. Food scenes sell it. Food scenes are great. Food scenes are
I like how you're spending this as a devotion to the fans act.
Big time. I can't be eating all that rich food all the time, in real life. So like we wanted this to look good, and I think it does look very good.
It looks very good, yeah.
And we wanted it to feel like a show, and the budget that we had. If anyone in production looked at the number we had, and they're like, you want to do what? Like, you want to travel across Canada, hit 6 cities, and shoot up do a full up urban wildlife show, like that's crazy. And we did it, and it looks great. And now, as the episodes are out and people are seeing them, it's it's been spectacular to see the response as well. And I think for a lot of people, this, very much like your podcast, it's a gateway for people to understand a thing that they might not have heard of before.
How did you pick the cities? Are there cities is anybody in Winnipeg like, what's up, man? Like, what's wrong with Winnipeg?
So I spent... so I have a list somewhere, and I think we had, I had 30 different episode ideas, like location and animals and all this stuff, like, just different combinations. And so this series is 6 cities, 6 animals. And what I wanted was, I wanted the right combination of an animal that makes sense for that city. So it's not just like a random place. Like I wanted an animal that helped tell the story of that city, or a city that helped tell the story of that animal. So, in Vancouver, we did harbor seals, because like you walk along the seawall and there are these seals like swimming beside you. It's phenomenal. And, we really want to do that. And Saskatoon has this like brilliant like river going through it that's wide. And there are these beavers that have become like super popular. And like we want,
and super tame, by the way.
Well, this is the thing with the beavers in that episode. You will meet a guy called Mike DeGoo, as you met
guy.
the beaver guy, and Billy, like he loves urban wildlife more than the both of us combined. This guy is a legend. He's the sweetest. He's so awesome, and he's just a guy with a point and shoot camera, and he knows these beavers, and they know him. So he really walked me through how to do it, and for the series, like, ethics is huge. There's for us, there's no baiting, there's no putting these animals in like dangerous positions. It's all done, as I like, properly. So he coached me through a lot of this. And in some of those spots, the beavers are just so used to people, but you have to know how to behave. It's like you're going into their area, their world, and there are all these like little things like you can't, if they're moving, if the beavers are moving, you can't move or they'll take off. I know it's counterintuitive. It's unlike a lot of animal scenarios. So if the beaver is swimming or up on land and is going towards a branch, don't move. When it sits and it gets itself sort of situated, starts eating, that's when you can move. And I don't know why. I've read a pretty decent amount about beavers, and that's something that I have no explanation for. But Mike, I spent so much time with these beavers. He just knows. He just knows that that's the ticket. Don't move. Don't move until they're stopped. They're done moving. Then you could kind of get in and get your place. And that was just the motion. If it wasn't for him and his knowledge of these beavers, I wouldn't have landed the photo that I did.
Are there ones that you just didn't manage to get? Like when you're sort of setting up a very particular challenge for yourself.
So the in every city, I got. I don't want to do too many. I don't want to give away too many spoilers here. But what I'll say was, I set up a challenge for myself to get a particular photo. In Edmonton, it wasn't. I didn't set out to get a photo of an animal. I set out to tell the story of an animal underpass, and I set out to tell it in a really specific, challenging, insane, complex way that was really tricky with the time that we had and the weather. And it was that's the one where I would say things didn't go to plan, but I was still able to tell that story. I was still able to tell the story of what I had set out to tell. And I think, my ego aside, I had like a really grandiose particular photo in mind that I wanted. And, I stepped out of myself for a little bit, looked at the bigger picture, and just like went back to like, just the basics of photo storytelling. Like when you're using a collection of images to tell a story, like that's a very particular kind of storytelling. And that's what I did for that location. We had, I don't know, man, we had outstanding luck, and things happened that I can't explain. The timing, it was hard. Like every city was hard. Our final episode, which is St. John's, Newfoundland, I wanted a whale. I wanted a photo of a whale close to the city because they come right up to the mouth there. And like, as I'm doing it, we'd been on the road for like weeks at this point. We hadn't been sleeping, and I'm out there and we're getting blasted by the wind, the Atlantic wind like ripping in. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, what am I doing? And that was that's the final episode, the big finale, blah, blah, blah. Or sorry, I shouldn't say the final episode, the final travel episode. We go back to Toronto after that for the very last one. But like, I don't know, things just worked out for us. And it just, not to say there weren't challenges, because there were a lot of challenges, and all the challenges you see are very real. And we just, I don't know, I lucked out, and it just made the series so much better.
I'll say those underpasses you're talking about are awesome. It's something that we had an episode about the impacts of roads on wildlife. And if anyone had listened to that and is curious, like, what does one of these underpasses look like? That's a great piece of a video to look at and sort of tell the story of how they work. And I think I probably won't give too much away to say that at least in a couple episodes, I think we've seen 4, that there are challenges posed by humans. Yeah. Which is something that it's obvious to me as someone who likes to explore urban cities for wildlife and stuff. but it's a particularly urban kind of challenge. Like you're sitting there in this underpass waiting for these kids to stop graffitiing.
Yeah.
The underpass. It's sort of like, and I'm thinking like, first I'm thinking they're totally going to steal his camera.
Yeah.
And then I'm also just thinking, I know this feeling. I've been there where you're like, I'm going to go here. For me, it's often I'm going to go here and look under stuff for snakes. And you get there and someone's having a picnic, and you're just like, I suppose I could lift up all these objects and look under them for snakes, but it's going to feel real weird if those people are sitting there like looking at me and sometimes I just go do it anyways, and sometimes I have great conversations with people and like turn them on to stuff. But there's also just it's the challenge of imagine you run into this a lot in cities where especially if you're trying to get pictures of something that could get spooked somehow. That episode really like tickled me in that way.
So I'll give you two answers, and if this one's a little too R-rated for the podcast, you could cut it. Then I'll give a different answer after that. I had this scope. This wasn't part of the series. I had this spot picked out. I do nighttime camera trap stuff, so I have this big setup with this sensor and this camera, and these flashes and all this stuff, and I leave it out, and it takes me like sometimes weeks to find a spot that's going to work. So down on the south shore of Toronto, or on kind of the lakeside of Toronto, I had this like spot picked out. It was amazing. I could tell that a lot of animals were kind of cutting through the reeds, and there's this pinch point between the reeds and the water. There were so many animal tracks there that I couldn't discern them. Like I could tell a few, but it was so crazy. And then there's this little, like, tiny little grassy spot. I'm like, I'll put my camera in that grassy spot. I'll set up. It's super secluded. Like, I can leave my stuff out. No one's gonna mess with it. So I had my bags, like, everything ready to go. I carried it down there. The sun was just setting. Part of these reeds, and there were two people having sex right there. And I'm just like, okay, you know what? This isn't the wildlife I was looking for. So yeah, I packed up my bags and went home. Like, well, there we go. And my wife was like, why are you home early? I'm like, don't worry about it.
It wouldn't be the first, man. I've definitely shown up to spots to go look for critters, and there's a car parked there and the car's rocking. And you sort of like, part of me's like, well, oops, I should give them the privacy. And part of me's like, no, I'm just going to walk around their damn car. If you're going to have sex in a car in a public place, like, I'm really sorry. I'm not like going to go peek in your window, but like, I'm not going to go out of my way to avoid your car when you're doing something that, frankly, if you care that much about privacy, you wouldn't be doing it here. Makes sense.
Animals being animals, right? With that Edmonton episode, we were like you say, it's just such a good example of how our designs that are usually really bad for animals, but our designs can like help. And these underpasses are awesome. And the first one that we were at is like, it's this weird like spaceship design. You could like see up between the highway. It's triple decker. It's impossible to imagine unless you could like see the episode. So
well, no, but this is something that came up before in this previous episode we did. You have the multiple levels for different animals that have different preferences for what they're comfortable moving across. That was fascinating to see. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's such a cool thing to see. So as we were setting up these, like, we heard this music and we saw this kind of like group of people walking towards us, and I mean, we probably had, I don't know, like well over $100,000 worth of gear with us. And these are cinema cameras, these are lenses. I have all my stuff, and like my nighttime camera trap stuff, that stuff I've ordered from the UK. Like, you can't go to Best Buy or whatever, Future Shop, and buy that stuff.
For those who are curious, we're not talking about a $50 game cam here.
No, no. This is like a DSLR triggered by this like special sensor, flashes, stands, clamps, all of this stuff, and I'm like getting it set up, and this kind of group moves towards us, and I'm like, oh boy, like this could be and I'm just in my head, I'm like, okay, I'll like negotiate that we get to keep the memory cards, right? Like, that's at this point I'm like, we could still kind of salvage something. So then like they come up and they're like 15, they don't care, right? They're just like, hey, we're like, hey. So they're just like tagging. We're trying to shoot like an episode and they're blasting music. So like, I don't know what to do. So at one point, like, see, this is the episode, like, there are sirens and the cops are coming, and they're just kind of like, all right. They finish up their tagging and move on. It was funny too. They came by. They're like, "Good night, guys. Have a good night. Like, good luck with your photos." We're like, "Thanks. Good luck not getting arrested."
Aw.
It was sweet. It was good. They were good kids.
Some very sweet graffiti punks.
Totally. Yeah.
And then on a less positive human interaction note, I appreciated your annoyance at finding a bunch of people feeding raccoons in the Montreal episode. Sorry. I'll say there's an episode in Philadelphia where a few years ago there are some people who feed a lot of outdoor cats, which is our own frustration, and they had like found an opossum eating at one of their cat feeding spots, and then they decided to take it home because they thought it needed help, and like so they had sort of like which is it's illegal in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Well, most of the United States, probably Canada too, to just take home a wild animal for a pet, because you feel like it. And then it's just that it just didn't need to be done. Like it's a possum, like you're already kind of messing with their lives in a way by putting this like dumping food into their lives in an artificial way, and they look like. Possums always look like bumbling idiots, but they manage, you know. And so I felt a kindred spirit with you when I saw your reaction to those guys.
So there's a equally crazy scene in the St. John's Newfoundland episode,
dear.
we came up on these people like feeding raccoons, and there were like 20 raccoons, and there are people with these like bags of dog food, and this is what happens, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, but this is the cycle. People feed wildlife. They get comfortable, they come out, maybe it's just one, maybe it's just two, and then whatever it is, coyote, raccoon, fox, and then the animals expect it, they come out.
Andrew, people do this with bears.
Hand feeding, bringing marshmallows or whatever to the dump. And so like for instance, in this case, it was people with like kibbles, like dog food kind of kibbles. The raccoons are coming up, eating from their hands, and then they're like petting and like wrestling them, like grabbing the scruffs of their necks.
Saw that guy pet the raccoon, I was like, oh.
So what happens is people are curious, they come over, they'll see these things, and I'm telling you what's going to happen in that spot. This, maybe it's happened already, it's going to happen soon. A kid's going to get close, that kid's going to get bit by the raccoon, the city's going to come in, and then they're going to kill all of those raccoons. That happened in Vancouver with the coyotes in Stanley Park. It happens all over the place. And the animals aren't doing anything wrong. The animals are just being animals, and people are being idiotic. And oftentimes, you should common sense, right? Don't do this. But then the city's like, and I don't know if this is the case in Philly, but it's certainly the case in a lot of places in Canada and in other cities I know in the States. There's not the education. There aren't the signs. These bylaws that are there aren't being enforced because, nobody wants to pay for a bylaw officer to stand there and have this person be like, hey, don't give that wild animal dog food. Don't put your hand in that wild animal's, rabies vector animal's mouth. Don't do that. So that's why these things happen. And you see a moment of that in Montreal, in the Montreal episode. You see a moment of that in the St. John's episode. And it was disheartening, and in the moment I was so miserable that I was seeing this, but we rolled on it because I wanted to tell that story, show the danger, and have conversations about it with people like you in this instance, right? Because it seems so innocent, but it just it's one of the worst things you can do.
No, it feels like people feed squirrels, they feed birds, which are all creatures that don't pose much of a real risk to our health or safety. It's when you start feeding animals that, as you're pointing out, are rabies vectors, and then bigger animals like coyotes, even if they're not rabies vectors, it's rare, but they've been documented killing people. And you just really, it's profoundly bad idea. And there's the expression with bears, a fed bear is a dead bear.
Yep.
And it basically applies to these two. This is too sour a note to end on, though. I want to. So we're going to wrap up in a minute. I'll ask you: is there pick a moment in the series where you really got surprised by something that the animals were doing?
honestly, I had never spent. This isn't the first time. I mean, all the interactions were phenomenal and like breathtaking, and I'll remember them for the rest of my life. But the harbor seals, like they're figuring you out. I'm like, oh, these guys are smart. Like they know me, they recognize me, they're kind of swimming around, and they were so entertaining, and they were playing and playing and playing. And I was getting my photos, and they were so dynamic, and I spent so much time with them over the 2 days that I was shooting them. And I'm just like, I love these animals. I loved watching it. So I was glad to hear that your kid liked that episode. And I'll show maybe this shirt too. I'll hold this up so you can see it, and I'll read it out. I bought this there.
Oh, there.
It says, "I just freaking love seals," and it's got a picture of a harbor seal there. I just happen to be wearing the shirt today that I picked up in Vancouver on that shoot. But if you're ever in a city where you can get to harbor seals, and they kind of show up, and just get there, because it's incredible. You develop an appreciation for these animals, and I promise you, you're going to rethink the waterways in any city, right? Because you're like, man, there is life under there, and it is busy, and it is beautiful.
Excellent point. One last thing I'll ask you is, what's next?
So I want to do more of this. My goal is to continue with this series in some way. I want to take it international. I want to do this across the States. I've got cities in Europe in mind. In Asia, I've been lucky enough to have previously traveled to places like Japan, India, Pakistan, for reasons unrelated to wildlife. But these places, like these cities that I visited, are bustling with animals that I never get to see, and seeing them there is phenomenal. So I'd love to go with my camera. I'd love to tell these stories. I'd love to have fun, and I'd love to replicate what I've just done in Canada, and hopefully that some of your listeners will be able to go and check out the series and see how much fun it is, and then just like take that experience globally. That would be the next step.
I have 2 words for you: raccoon dogs.
Dude, they're on my list. They are on my list. It's so funny. That is like, they are so high up there. I have cities picked out where we're going to see them because, like you said, raccoon dogs. What else do you need? There's the pitch right there.
We had an episode years ago where I figured out that these things do occur in urban areas in Japan. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. How cool is that? And then I encountered the whole mythology of them, which starts off sounding dirty, but in Japan was not considered sexually dirty.
No,
which is that they would appear in, like, this is hundreds of years ago. They would appear in like mythology, but also in art, as they're sort of almost personified, like looking half like a person. But their magical power is that their scrotums can expand enormously, so that like there's these paintings, which again are not pornographic. They're just sort of like this is, in a way, like in the culture, body parts aren't considered necessarily dirty in the way that we would think of it in our prudish culture. And so you've got like a picnic party out, and oh no, it's raining, and the raccoon dog saves the day by expanding the scrotum to cover the whole picnic party. And
I've seen those hilarious.
Add it all up, and they're just such great animals. I think they've gotten a bad. Maybe they've been involved with COVID as a vector, but it's not their fault.
That's not their fault.
And they're just awesome little animals.
So good.
Yeah.
I know you're wrapping this up shortly. Can I sell you on coming to Toronto, or anybody listening, as an urban wildlife destination? So here's my little pitch, okay? So I've got 5 short episodes online. You can find those. Central Park, 843 acres. That's how big it is. We know how big Central Park is. The John Hines Urban Wildlife Refuge, 1,000 acres. Kind of the east side of Toronto, we have the Don Valley, which is a river system that goes from way north of the city down to the lake. It's massive. And the basin of that, which contains like housing and development, stuff like that, but the basin, so it feeds into the river system there, from the south all the way to the north. So once again, Central Park, 843 acres, John Hines, 1,000, Don Valley, River Basin, 89,000 acres.
That's enormous. Although I would say that's not why I would go to Toronto for wildlife. I would just go on trash night and just like watch raccoons try to bust into trash cans.
So so that's the reputation. Like Toronto has, that's a reputation
the most badass raccoons in the continent.
Yeah. That's something that people outside of Toronto know about. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
To me. Yeah, I thought that was just like I thought that was an us thing.
Oh no, it's something because when you get into urban wildlife literature, it's a hot topic, and then there have been studies of raccoon. Call it intelligence, problem solving abilities is a probably more neutral way to put it.
Yep.
Looking at urban versus rural raccoons, using Toronto. There's a researcher who does this. I guess I forget her name.
Yeah, she's out of York University. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's well, I don't know if people who aren't into urban wildlife know about it, but I think once you start into the world of urban wildlife, the raccoons of Toronto are famous.
And this is a perfect place to wrap, because that is where the final episode of the series is. It's in Toronto, and we do a raccoon episode.
I don't think you'd have to convince me very much to come to Toronto for wildlife. It's also just a great city.
It is a great city. And that professor we were talking about, Suzanne McDonald, she does that intelligence work, and it's super cool. Toronto is a phenomenal city for our green space, for our wildlife, just to kind of hang out and see. You could come see the raccoons. I'll give you the tour. We could see the ones that live up in the trees, and then the ones that patrol the streets. And we could go down to Spadina, where you got some real seriously like. These are your street raccoons, man. These are epic, but they're cool to watch. They're smart, and hey, we got like good noodle spots too. So you can when you're done watching raccoons, you go for some late night pho or something like that.
That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you very much for coming on. It's fun talking to you. It's funny when you watch someone's videos and you get to see them and talk to them. You're like, hey, I'm talking to a celebrity.
Hardly. I don't know if celebrities and urban wildlife, if that will ever, those two will ever, those phrases will ever match.
You've hit that intersection, man. Well, I appreciate it. I hope we have good reasons, I hope we have reasons to interview you in the future. I hope to get up to Toronto and see some of these raccoons.
Awesome. Hit me up. Thank you, Billy. This has been a blast.